A very hearty good day to you all. My name is Deborah Jean-Baptiste Samuel, and I'm sharing with you today on World Read Aloud Day. This is a fascinating opportunity and a very exciting day for us to delve into some of the rich stories of the Caribbean. And I am reading a story about Nanny of the Maroons. It's set in Jamaica, but it can be found in this book, Crossing the Line, published by Hudder Education. Nanny of the Maroons. In the days of slavery, there were free people in Jamaica, free black people, and they were called Maroons. They had escaped from the English and from the Spanish, and some were actually born into freedom. They were led by Nanny, a woman. Nanny was beautiful. She was a warrior, but Nanny was something of a witch because they say she had the power to change her shape. Only her eyes remained the same, eyes where flames of freedom burned inside. Young men, young women, young people, warriors would flee, escape from the plantation to join with Nanny and the Maroons, and they lived in Nanny Town. And they say that Nanny was very strong. She would protect all the people of Nanny Town with her exquisite, very skillful methods of war. Peaceful but forceful methods of war. And they say, as the story goes, that everyone was afraid of Nanny. They said she was dangerous, She could catch bullets in her teeth. They say she lived high up in the mountains where two rivers met. And where these rivers met, she kept a cauldron burning, but no one could see any fire. But the smoke from this cauldron made people dizzy, and they fell asleep or got lost in the mountains. As long as Nanny and her people were free, the owners of the slaves were not happy. And so the governor and his generals, an army of Readcoats, decided they would go and find Nanny and Nanny Town and all those slaves up there and capture them. Oh, easier said than done. Because before they could capture Nanny Town, they had to actually find it. How were they doing that? Nanny had Nanny Town hidden in the mountains, the high mountains, the blue mountains of Jamaica. All the Brooks guys knew, all the sailors, soldiers, and Readcoats, all they knew was that Nanny Town was up in the mountains. It was up there somewhere in the bush, hidden in the clouds. And the army had to look for Nanny Town. So the soldiers came in their bright red coats. In the Caribbean sun, they fainted from the heat. Behind them, more soldiers came carrying food. And then they put slaves to carry all the implements. But Nanny was waiting for them. Nanny was waiting for them in Nanny Town. She knew exactly where they were, even though they had no clue where Nanny Town was. This is how skillful Nanny was. Her warriors were trained. They could detect if an enemy approached. So she told her people to act normal, go about your business, fetch water, cook food, look after the children. And she took the older men and the younger warriors with her, and they went to sidetrack the army and the Readcoats. Sometimes a Readcoat passed so close to the Maroons, they could pull the buttons off their coats and they would not know what happened to them because they were camouflaged in the forest. They were behind trees. They were between leaves. You could not see the Maroons, but they were right there ready to defend their people and that town. And when they came too close, Nanny would lead them astray. So sometimes they would see a Maroon on a rock far away and decide to change course, to follow. And then sometimes smoke from a cooking fire would rise, and then the Readcoats would change course to follow. Nanny was getting them properly lost. And then the clouds came down, and there was mist on the mountainside, and the place never seemed the same. Narrow pathways, encircling bush. Oh, Brooks and the Readcoats were lost. but Nanny and the Maroons knew exactly where they were. One night, Nanny was so brave, she even entered the enemy's camp. She went into Brooks and the Redcoats' camp while they were asleep and released all the slaves that they had captured. When they awoke, not one slave could be found. Well, Brooks was pretty annoyed. Brooks was deceived. Brooks could not understand how Nanny was able to come into the camp and release the slaves. Oh, he was determined now. He was going to find Nanny Town. But how? He didn't know where it was. And so Nanny continued to confuse the enemy. And 2 days passed, and the Redcoats were lost and they were tired. But then they found a path leading down the valley into a stream. And they saw some Maroons ahead of them, wading in the water. Oh, they followed. They pursued quickly. Then higher up on the shoulder of the mountain was Nanny. Looking on, it was all a plan to lead him where he was going. Oh, they laughed at him because he was lost and they were free and he could not touch them. They hid in the mountains, in every groove, in every cranny, in every cleft and in every crack of the rocks with the Maroons. Oh, they danced. They feasted on jerk pork. Oh, they had quite a time. They had provisions from the ground. And the children were singing and they were laughing because they had outsmarted the enemy and they could not be found. But Nanny knew this man Brooks and the Redcoats would come again because they'd always be looking for them. So she had a plan. She told all those from in Nanny Town where to hide, and she would lead Brooks and his soldiers up the hill and down the dale and then disappear by the waterfalls, behind the trees, set traps in their path, but they would never be found. She freed her people and by leading them to safety, and they must always be ready to move. And when next morning came, Red Brooks and his Redcoats were all over the mountainside looking for Nanny Town. And when they finally got there, no one was in the encampment. The town was empty. Nanny had moved all her people to safety. So wise, so brave. She set them to safety and she remained to confront Mr. Brooks of the Redcoats. And he was shocked that all his days of searching was because of this frail old lady named Nanny. Oh, but she was strong. She looked at him straight in his eyes. And he was with great surprise that all she did was laugh loudly. She turned and she ran. She jumped straight off one of the edge of the mountain cliffs, spread her arms wide, and she began to sail. Because remember I told you, Nanny had the power to change form, to change shape. They say she glided, she circled, she rose again, she joined a flock of birds, and they say her voice is still heard, singing bird song of the mountains, and her spirit still soars high above the empty Nanny Town. All her people safe in the forest, hiding from the enemy, and the enemy Brooks confused and perplexed, as all he could do was watch as Nanny floated, and Nanny circled, and she rose again, and her laughter filled the wind. That is Nanny of the Maroons.